Hello, and welcome to the 706 podcast, the podcast where we take a look at a movie, we submit it to the judgment of our panel, we try to decide whether it belongs as one of the 706 greatest movies of all time. My name is Connor, and I couldn't do the judging without my friends, my co-hosts. Please introduce yourselves, guys.
I'm Tony.
And I'm Anthony.
Hey, y'all, I'm Kirk.
Very upbeat today. This is very good. Let's see if I can not mess this up. The movie I brought in is 1993's True Romance, directed by Tony Scott, written by Quentin Tarantino. This is a movie that, interesting story really, Tarantino sold the script fairly early on, and this is how he made the money he could actually make Reservoir Dogs. So already we're talking about Tarantino, but the movie itself, let's talk a little bit about the plot, the vague sketch. Basically, it's a boy meets girl story. Clarence, played by Christian Slater, is kind of a nerdy guy, works in a comic book store, loves to go to Sonny Chiba movies, kung fu movies, karate movies on his birthday. He goes, can't find a date. He goes all alone, and he runs into Alabama, played by Patricia Arquette. And they sort of strike up a meeting. It turns out, actually, they go home together, they have sex. Turns out that, in fact, Alabama was a prostitute hired to play along, to sleep with Clarence, for his birthday, hired by his boss, apparently. But despite this, they kind of strike up a connection, and it turns out they fall in love, they marry. But essentially, Clarence is haunted by the existence of her pimp and the threat of her pimp, Drexel, played by Gary Oldman. And he eventually goes and kills him, takes Alabama's stuff back, which actually turns out to contain a huge hoard of cocaine, which belongs to the mafia. So essentially it's a love on the run story. It's running and gunning, they're being chased by the mafia, and yeah, it's a fairly violent story, kind of like we might expect from Tarantino. But let's get the first impressions. What did you guys think of this movie?
Sure. I'll jump right in if that's all right. So yeah, I thought it was pretty good. To me, I'm going to try to avoid just saying Tarantino over and over. There's a tendency with a movie
right,
like this.
I've already said it.
It's like if we're talking about being John Malkovich or something, you just say Charlie Kaufman. But Tony Scott did direct this movie, so he is to credit and blame for everything as well as Tarantino. But I will talk about Tarantino for a second, in that it does feel very much like an early screenplay and like a young man's screenplay, and that kind of feels almost like a fantasy of him, where he's written this writer surrogate, this Christian Slater character. He's kind of the young dude who he's really into genre films, and he's kind of lonely. He's living in the city, and and this woman just kind of comes up to him, and she's a prostitute. But no, it's cool. He plays it totally cool, and it's fine. And they actually fall in love, and they run off, and they get into this whole genre film style adventure, the kind of movie that he might actually want to go see. So there's kind of an element of that, which isn't horrible. It's kind of charming in a way. I kind of do like that about it. But the thing about this movie, it's very energetic. Every scene feels pretty electric. There's a lot of that great QT dialogue, of course. And Tony Scott does a good job with the action, which is pretty visceral, pretty intense, all fairly heightened, and all builds to a pretty bombastic conclusion. I guess my biggest issue with this movie would be that there's a lot of cool little pieces, but it doesn't really cohere in any meaningful way. There are all these scenes with these great actors just delivering these speeches, but none of them get really any arcs, you get the Gary Oldman character. He dies immediately. You got James Gandolfini. He gets one big sequence. You get, what's the Kirk? Kirk, who are you? Michael Walters, Christopher Walken. He gets one great scene, and then he dies, or no, he doesn't die, but he never comes back in the end. Yeah. So there's a lot of that, and it doesn't really feel coherent. It feels like they really could have used another draft of the script to really make things kind of come full circle to make it a more cohesive and satisfying experience. I think especially the ending, it just kind of feels like, again, just this fantasy. He almost dies, he makes it. He gets the kid. They're living on the beach. And it's fine for what it is, but it doesn't have the unity of vision that I'm used to from something by Tarantino. I'm not as familiar with Tony Scott's work. And I think he does an admirable job, but I think that there are problems with the script he can't quite overcome. But I did enjoy it, so I'll move on.
Tarantino called this his most autobiographical script, actually. So, somewhat strangely, but yeah, Kirk.
I enjoyed this movie quite a great deal. Actually, I kind of compared it while I was watching it to its analog, I believe, at least chronologically and thematically, which would be
Beauty and the Beast.
Yes, Beauty and the Beast. No, Christian Slater, those eyebrows are quite beast-like. But, I would say Natural Born Killers. Also Tarantino written.
Oliver Stone.
Oliver Stone. Kind of like Connor said, a love on the run. There's an element of hyper violence and this kind of this wistful love that can transcend the violence that kind of contextualizes it. I very much love this movie. I think the things that stood out for me, besides kind of the great performances by these great, renowned, prolific actors, would be like just kind of the set, the aesthetic. Maybe I would say that the movie starts in Detroit, it ends in L.A., so there's kind of this gritty, cold seediness to the beginning of the movie in Detroit, and then this kind of feigned opulence that plays out in L.A. I like that contrast. I like the romantic edge of it. I thought it was, obviously it's obviously very idealistic or not at all mimetic in any sense. Maybe in a little bit the idea of kind of a love born out of not necessarily necessity or prudence, but just kind of that irrationality that kind of plays into love a lot, and so I appreciated that. I enjoyed it. I did. The Hans Zimmer made the score. I was actually commenting on this the main piece of the score, which is I forget the name of the song, but it's in other movies.
What else?
It was on the. It's on like 50 First Dates. So I mean they jacked it, but basically before we started, it was playing in the DVD menu, and so I knew it was Hans Zimmer because I know that song, but. That kind of little number, it's I forget the name of the instrument. It's very tropical. It's like
steel drums.
It's kind of like steel drums. It's
almost like
very,
a xylophone or something.
Yeah. Very very like
something struck
tropical,
bell-like,
and kind of beautiful. That kind of plays over and over again. It twists and turns, and I think that plays into the juxtaposition of this kind of, like I said, ultra violence with maybe a love that's somehow apart from that, but at the same time that can't escape it. And at the end, there's this integration, I feel. So I don't know. Go ahead, Anthony, or whatever. Yeah.
You guys know my opinion from last week.
Right, he picked the movie.
I forget.
Right.
What did you say last week?
I didn't like it.
Oh.
But so upon rewatch, I have two positives I took away from this. One, there's 5 minutes of Christopher Walken for Kirk to practice his impersonation.
Yeah.
And two, I could tell Tony congrats because I think I may have found one of my least favorite films, not just of this podcast, but that I've seen in quite some time. I did not like this movie at all. I absolutely hate it. I think Patricia Arquette's character is not just one of the worst female characters I've ever seen her in. It is one of the worst movie characters I've seen her in. We talked about arcs last week. I think Christian Slater's arc is absolutely awful. Tony called this basically Tarantino, like almost like a fanfic. I think that whole story of it is rather lame, uninteresting to me, and I have a theory about why it sort of resonated all this time. I believe it's sort of harping on this sort of idea, this teenage fantasy that you have sex with a beautiful girl, everything will fall into place. Your dad will not just come around to finally listening to you. He'll accept you. He'll tell you he loves you. You'll get not, and then guess what? Your best friend will turn around to help you out however much you need to. And hey, even if you end up, in danger, hurt, or any way, guess what? You are getting laid. Awesome. But you know what? My opinion has basically even cemented further since last time. But let me go to a quote, actually, by Roger Ebert, who gave it 3 stars. So he gave it a positive review. But I thought this summed up better how I feel about the movie than I could ever say it. So this is from Roger Ebert, from Ebert and Siskel. A case study of the inflamed fantasies of violent, stupid, amoral, and gun-loving world of the sexually frustrated male teenager. On the level, admittedly a very low level, it tells the story of a lot of teenage boys and men stuck in this adolescence who would like to live in through. Sorry, I wrote this down wrong. At least until they grow up and develop average intelligence. Just a stupid, idiotic, fragile, masculine fantasy. And I would just like to use that to say I think that's my big problem with the movie. I think it goes nowhere. I think it's dumb. I think it's stupid. I think it's choppy. And I think it's poorly directed. I think Tarantino would get better, and he probably could have done a better job directing this. But I think as a whole, the movie's just awful.
All right.
Well, that's it, guys. We'll see you next week.
I'll see you later. What's really interesting, Anthony has a quote from Roger Ebert. I brought my own quote from Roger Ebert, which is kind of different and kind of conflicts with what Anthony was saying, although, as you're saying, this comes from his 3-star review of the movie. So I'll read this for you. There are a few objections to True Romance that I haven't thought of, and I dismiss them all with a wave of the hand. This is the kind of movie that creates its own universe and glories in it. The universe in question could best be located inside the inflamed fantasies of an adolescent male mind. Not any adolescent, but the kind of teenage boy who goes to martial arts movies and fantasizes about guns and girls with great big garbanzos. And then he goes on to say, check your brains at the door. I was very mystified by the use of the word garbanzo. It's not the only time he uses it. But this raises questions. This is kind of like, Ebert, so check your brains at the door. This is a fantasy. This is something that is fun. It's, sure, it's a stupid male fantasy, but, we can all enjoy it. So don't worry about it. We can think of all the objections to it. Check your brains at the door. I find that a really interesting idea and not complicated. On the one hand, I kind of enjoy this movie. I think it's interesting. I think it has, I think it's pretty good craft. You guys have brought up some of the issues of, what really is the movie about, but it is the issue of, is this a fantasy, or what exactly is it? If it is indeed something that's totally from kind of the perspective of a Clarence character, of a Tarantino analog, of a young male comic book nerd, right? Why then do we get something like where we have Patricia Arquette narrating the story at the beginning over the it's a piece actually over the music, which actually comes from kind of originally it's kind of people talk about it as a nod to Badlands. I'm not sure if Malick was the first to use it, but there's a famous thing of Sissy Spacek's narration over this Carl Orff little piece at the beginning of Badlands and throughout, and at the end of Badlands as well. You get kind of the same thing in this movie, so it's trying to kind of place it into a tradition, where Badlands was kind of maybe reacting to the idea of a Bonnie and Clyde as sort of a dangerous idea and sort of something that in reality is kind of messed up maybe. This movie kind of embraces the kind of the ridiculousness of it, kind of embraces the idea, sort of the importance of fantasy. And I don't know, I mean, we can think about themes or moments in the movie that kind of resonate with this. Of course, there's a lot of references to pop culture in the movie. That's something that's very typical of these kind of this 90s era. We become more conscious of our consumption of pop culture, and I think Tarantino here is kind of embracing it, something that's cool, even if it's stupid. Even if it's lowbrow, that doesn't mean it's not something worthwhile and useful for people.
Yeah, it's something not to be eschewed. We're not supposed to push this under the rug and pretend like it doesn't exist. I mean, this is a cultural product born out of a specific cultural time frame. I think to critique it for existing or for being what it is just it's getting mad at the sky for being blue. I don't know. I think it's Yeah, it's juvenile. It's
And you could
It's
ask, is it
fantastical.
completely honest about its own juvenileness? And that's tough. I think it wasn't as obvious to me. My kind of way of going at this movie was, okay, it is kind of a silly fantasy. The movie's going to show this.
Well, this is one of the areas where I think that Quentin Tarantino directing would kind of help, because I feel like his movies take place in this very clearly heightened, kind of fantastic world.
Lurid, colorful.
Pulp Fiction, obviously, totally fantastic. This does not look like, and it almost takes on this kind of timeless quality, I'd say. This is very much it's so 90s. Everything looks just so 90s.
It's like a mechanicalized direction.
Very cold. Very cold,
Yeah,
light in general, as opposed to Tarantino, who's very warm.
And there's not a lot of I don't feel like it's there's not much, I think, self-awareness to this element of male fantasy. It's played very straight. There's no real subversion. I didn't get the sense that it was ever.
The
winking at
Elvis.
me. The Elvis thing is just I think just kind of absurdity. I guess maybe you're right. I don't know. Maybe that is the nod. Maybe that is the wink. And I don't know. Those scenes are very weird for me. I mean, are they meant to be just comic relief? Are they meant to be kind of? I mean, they're not played completely straight, but. Yeah, I don't know.
They're supposed to be triumphant in kind of a,
what those
touching way.
Scenes always remind me of are the old SNL skits in Wayne's World when a Jim Morrison character would pop out and start talking to him.
Indian.
Yeah, and then they do it in the second movie as well. But that's what I always thought of.
Yeah, it is a little bit like that. It is silly, but it's your pop icon appearing to you. But it's also he does this when he's looking in the mirror. In the beginning, we see him kind of trying to summon confidence by looking into the mirror when he's first talking to the girl who he can't go to the movie with him. He's trying to work up this confidence. It is a thing of kind of male identity coming into your masculinity kind of thing. And I think, honestly, there's moments in this movie that comes across oh, this is kind of awful. This masculinity is fairly awful, but I don't know if Tarantino is aware of that or if he kind of doubles down on it. If he wants to kind of put it all on the table, just like we have kind of racism as sort of a thing that's put on the table in this movie. Is that what he was going for when he wrote the script? I don't know. It's difficult.
I think the one thing I did like about the Elvis that I thought was kind of a nice touch is at the very beginning we see him making this speech to this woman at a bar to hit on her.
Right.
And it doesn't work. And then later when he's at the diner, coffee shop or whatever with Patricia Arquette, he's using the same speech. So we can see this is just his kind of in vain technique, and there's also the fact that he had to be set up with her in the first place.
Right,
he has no faith. It's almost like this fantasy again of oh man, I don't know how to get a woman, but if I had one, she'd love me. If I got that far, she'd see what a great guy I am. But I can't get that far because they don't see what's
they don't come to Sonny Chiba movies.
So which I guess feeds into the fantasy again. But I thought it was a clever little touch.
It's funny because I just thought about that as a Mary Sue moment. So.
For him or for her? What do you mean?
For him. It's a great little recurring thing I always think about in dystopian YA fiction even, of the moment that doesn't work for one guy ends up working for a different guy. It's usually used to complain about female narrators. It's the same
here's
thing.
The thing. I don't think that's problematic for that, but I think what is a bit problematic, right, is just the idea of literally she is kind of the perfect combination of sexuality and innocence, right? That's kind of this whole Patricia Arquette character. I think that's kind of why she was cast. Patricia Arquette does a very convincing kind of cutesy attitude, maybe childish. Maybe I think for some people might come across as kind of ugh, it's kind of ugh. But I think it kind of fits into the movie. I think she works well for it. But I don't know. I think there's some of her emotional moments maybe a bit over the top or kind of a bit exploitative of her, of that female character. But I think, like you said, you have to kind of contextualize it in that idea of the male fantasy. But even then, and like I said, it's complicated. Then why does she narrate the movie? And is this, if Clarence can have his Elvis, what is Patricia Arquette's fantasy if she has one? We see her watching soap operas at one point, but does she just agglomerate? Does she just kind of consume whatever Clarence likes? What is it exactly?
She's given the one moment where she's I don't like. What is the band she doesn't like?
The Partridge Family.
I don't like Partridge.
She doesn't really, but she likes everything else he likes, which is kind of funny. Yeah, she just absorbs all his interests into her.
So it is perfect. Yeah, but there is. Yeah, it's difficult.
She even gets to talk about the kid at the end when they're on the beach.
The kid
moment. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
I think she exerts some agency in this movie. I mean, she has one of the most brutal scenes,
right?
between her and James
With
Gandolfini is one of the most violent scenes between a man and a woman that I think I've ever seen in cinema. It's really brutal, but and she doesn't give in. She doesn't necessarily. I don't know. I
See, I disagree on that point, though, because she has this moment, and it's a moment you call of agency, but when you think about it, and if we talk about it as a male fantasy, then what happens to Clarence in this whole time, the one scene of actual violence on him, is basically at the end, and when he's fighting with the Gary Oldman character. Now, the Gary Oldman character, he's getting somewhat beat up, of course, right? But then we get to the end, when the shootout's happening, and everyone's affected but him until the very end, when he gets grazed on the eye. So she's able to go through all this trauma purely just for him. It's a sense of agency that's already been guided by another force outside of her.
Would you rather he have been more roughed up in the final fight?
That's an issue that's playing into the fantasy.
She's not roughed up at all.
I think the biggest problem is Patricia Arquette's just not a character. Alabama is just purely there with a fantastical moment. She has hardly any lines.
I would say to address the... Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was saying about that scene, that very violent scene. I'll say it's one of those things that I think kind of... out of context, it's a very effective scene. They play it super well. It's very well written and performed, and it is brutal as all hell. But I think, again, it's just kind of this fantasy of, like, not only is she there for anything, she can, like, she's never going to betray him, she's never going to give him up, and she can stand up for herself, and she can take on this awful man, and, like, it feeds into the same, I think, fantasy. Like,
and the camera gets to stare at her boobs half the time while she fights, so that's a great little...
I agree a little bit, but...
If you look at this movie through the male fantasy framework, you're not going to enjoy... I mean, you're going to be skeptical, you're going to be kind of disgusted, but
I think
if you look at it as a mutual fantasy, as one that we feed into both men and women in this culture, in postmodern America, I think it's something that's interesting, where women can play into roles of the damsel, the proverbial kind of object of desire, but at the same time, they may want to play into that. They may use it to their advantage. They may use it to drive their newlywed husband to go kill their former pimp, even though they may say that they don't want him to, or it's a very romantic thing. I don't know.
That moment is very weird and kind of dark. When Clarence talks to himself, tries to talk himself into going and killing Drexel. He hasn't really been asked to. He does it sort of saying, like, he's still breathing out there. He's breathing the same air you are. It's kind of this kind of crazy idea of what is it? Is it he can't accept, anyway.
That is odd.
It is a weird and kind of really intense, hyper masculine kind of thing. I don't know. It rubbed me a little bit the wrong way on this watch through, but...
well, it's his id is talking to him, and it's in the form of Elvis. It's cultural. It's culturally influenced.
And then when he comes back from this brutal scene where he shoots Drexel, there's this kind of discordant moment where he says, it's like, I killed him. And he comes back with a bunch of burgers or whatever. And then she says to him, like, you killed him? That's the most romantic thing, it's kind of corny. It's like really stupid. It's like, how could you really believe that? But like, okay, we're in the world of fantasy. It is hyper ridiculous. But
if you have a willing suspension of disbelief for this movie, maybe you can find something of it or through it. But I guess it's not for everybody. I can find a joy in this movie. I find it fantastical in a good way, and not necessarily in kind of a oh brother type of way, and I find the performance is particularly excellent, and I think the writing is spot on. I think some of the lines are just kind of really...
No, I enjoyed the movie. I'm enjoying the movie. I think you can enjoy it and acknowledge... I'm not saying that, not that you're not, but I think you can acknowledge what it is and still enjoy it. I mean, I'm trying to take the movie to task. I'm trying to grapple with it, but I enjoy watching it. I think scene to scene, moment to moment, there's never really a dull moment. It moves at a good pace. The 2 hours go by pretty quick, and as you said, there are a lot of great performances. There are a lot of great little scenes. The writing is, as far as just the dialogue goes, I would say is very solid. He's a sense of he's being just super precocious, I think. And as I said, the ending is just like, it's so bonkers that it's fun. Just the fact that you have like the the cops and the mafia and these dudes who work for the Hollywood drug guy who are like, I hate cops. I'm gonna kill all of them. Like the dumbest.
You know, everything's just being messed up in this moment.
Enemy of the State totally ripped that ending off.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
I haven't seen
I've never seen it.
But yeah, and I got to give props to Tony Scott here. You know, we haven't talked about him too much. He's famous for kind of introducing frenetic, kind of more experimental for the time kind of filmmaking in mainstream Hollywood and action movies. That was his thing. He made Top Gun, for instance, or Man on Fire. And that it really is a masterful, really amazing scene at the end there. Even just if not on the character level, though the writing is great, just purely on the visual level, I think it's pretty intense.
It's almost harkening back to, I don't know what movie it was, but it is harkening back to those Asian films
that they're watching in their early moments.
That Slater Tino loves so much. They're watching a movie on TV, and we see a similar gunfight with similar squib splatter going on.
We're seeing a John Woo film.
And then at the end, it gets into a very similar mode. This heightened, ultra dramatic and earnest, just like the guy's dying, like, he shot me. He shot me, and then one of the cops goes up and says, "This is for Peter." It's like, this is out of nowhere. We don't care about these cops, which I love the cops, by the way, because they're like hilarious, but we don't care about them. They're not like good guys.
Right.
No one's really a good person in this movie. They're all just kind of in it for themselves, which I enjoy. I think that's part of the charm of it. But yeah, no, I think that ending really works for me on that level for sure. Just as a climax.
Yeah.
I do love the part with Elliot, though, when he's in the elevator and they're like, "You're a fucking actor." Did I break the explicit thing for the first time?
You did, actually. That's the first time.
Wow.
I've never done that, so...
I guess when you bring up True Romance.
I love the part where Christian Slater says, "Leave the gorillas." He's talking about animal crackers. Don't eat the gorillas out of my animal crackers box. But yeah.
One scene I think they could have cut, though, that was one of the funnier scenes, is just that just didn't really add to the coherence at all, was the audition with...
Oh my god, yes.
Guy? Like, it's a funny scene, but it has no place in the movie. I wonder if that was added for the unrated version.
Okay, so here's the deal.
We also see how goofy he is next in like the next scene. So
he's
goofy
really the whole time, but...
Let me just talk about this. One thing about the movie is that it was kind of... the order in which Tarantino wrote the scenes... Originally, the script was written sort of out of order, kind of like a Pulp Fiction or a Reservoir Dogs. Essentially, it's kind of like this. It opens with Clarence's monologue, the I'd have sex with Elvis monologue. Then we see opening credits. Then we see Drexel in his kind of first scene where he kills his cronies. And then we're introduced to Clarence in Alabama at Clarence's father's house, Dennis Hopper's house. So we get them talking. We don't know what's going on with them. And then the mob guys, Christopher Walken, shows up. And then, eventually, Clarence tells the whole story of how he killed Drexel and how they met in a flashback. So it's kind of like, it would be very different. And the idea is that kind of for each moment, he's kind of dropping you into these things where he has suddenly just a character-based moment, a little scene, a little thing to introduce you to a new character. And you're going to, through that, even though you're dropped into the new character, you're going to work your way back. And each time you're going to meet the new character, you're going to learn a little something more about what's going on. So that kind of detective structure. And people don't talk about this, but I really think, honestly, as I've been thinking about it more and more, Tarantino himself admitted that he thought Scott's rearrangement of the script was better. I think it would have been a lot more interesting had it been shot out of order. There'd be so much we wouldn't know. So much more ambiguity. I think a lot of these issues would be talking about of who's bad and who's good. Is this a good... it would have made a lot more sense kind of in its context. Would have been a lot more interesting ride, I think. But
be much more heightened and kind of
part
unreal.
Of more easy to accept it as just a fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so.
Patricia Arquette's deficiencies might be easier to overlook.
Sure.
But I mean, that's a what-if question.
It's a what-if question, but it's interesting. Yeah. So, I think we're coming up to kind of the end. We can probably talk about, our final verdicts. Guys can cast your votes and say your final words. I think we know what everyone's opinion is.
I mean,
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, look, nothing here persuaded me. The more you guys talked about male fantasy, the more I even found out I felt repulsed by this movie. I think I'm going to end I could throw, quote after quote by critics I respect and could say this better than I am, or I could, but I'll just throw out Gene Siskel's quote is, "Congratulations, Tarantino and Tony Scott. You finally gave men 2 hours to not masturbate." So...
Ugh, okay. That was a bit much, but...
The champion of progressive femininity here, coming from the guy who made us watch Beauty and the Beast last week, where,
I have some
no matter
stories
how you
about
look,
Kirk for that.
no matter how you look, if you have cash, you'll get a girl. Trust me, and she may even read. Anyways, just
so
kidding.
do you not
just
like
kidding,
girls who
Anthony.
read, Kirk?
No, but if you find one that does,
wow.
Yeah, no, just kidding, Anthony.
Yeah.
Did you vote no? Yeah, okay. I vote yes. Tony, you can have fun. I know you're gonna say no, but I enjoy this.
Draw it out, Tony.
I feel that this movie. Maybe I'm in the minority, and that's good because usually I'm the one that hates it and everybody else likes it. So or sometimes. But I enjoyed this movie. It was a fun ride. I found it to be exhilarating. I was in touch. I loved the late 80s, early 90s, just kind of as an aesthetic, as something through which to gaze upon Americana, and I think
Absolutely.
This is just an unabashed look at that time and at our motivations as a society, and I think the element of love can be underscored and or downplayed as just kind of a device through which this male fantasy is enacted. But I don't know. I think that there may be something there. I think if we look deep enough, we can maybe find I don't know, like a true romance.
A truffle?
I was going to say a true romance. Tony, you ruined my catchphrase.
I'm sorry.
That was my Rotten Tomatoes quote, and you just fucked it up.
I think actually you're in the majority for this, based on the RT score.
On Metacritic's like 57 or something, one of those.
Okay,
So I would love to say yes, just because Anthony is being a little sanctimonious, and I'd love to say no, just because Kirk had to bring up Beauty and the Beast for no reason. Despite that was last week.
Reason.
But I'm gonna have to say no. I enjoyed this movie, but I don't think it's anything really essential or anything really you have to see. I think these sorts of ideas and this sort of approach has been done with more finesse and more grace and elegance. And I enjoy the film. I'd recommend it, but I can't say it's from the 7 to 6. So no.
All right. Well, yeah, sure, yeah. And when I watched this, this watch through, I wasn't as positive on it either. But I still think it's very interesting. It's still hard. It's hard for me to figure out, honestly. I'm still trying to think of it. Yeah. But
play the Boo clip or what?
That's for
unanimous.
Oh, unanimous. Okay.
Movie is sexist. Okay, so
I'll get the woman who booed when Pulp Fiction won the Palme d'Or. She's like, "Scandal! Scandal!" I'm like, Jesus Christ, it's annoying. Use that clip.
The scandal would be good.
I would love it if after all this time we found out it was really Clint Eastwood saying no. He voted yes.
A lot of actors. Right, they should be capable of that. Anyway, okay, let's move on to the next segment, where you guys select a movie, offer it to me, and I get to either accept it or refuse it based on my whim.
Who went least? Was it Tony?
That was Tony.
Who do you want to go first, Tony?
Anthony, you can go.
All right.
You just go down the line.
So I am nominating 2010's Edgar Wright's Scott Pilgrim versus the World, a awesome blend of action comedy and what is now being considered the sort of millennial comedy. So
wait,
I'll just
what did you choose?
Scott Pilgrim.
Oh, Scott Pilgrim. Okay.
What do you think?
You don't do this until the
No. That
was Cox Pilgrim.
That was actually.
I actually suggested Hostel Part 2.
Hostel Part 2. All right, count me in. Oh boy,
checking his phone, going through the list.
What's on Netflix?
Yeah. All right, you want me to go? I'll go.
Go ahead, Tom.
I narrowed it down to 3. I'm
like
having a really, really hard time. So basically, Let's see what. Okay, so I'm gonna go with a movie. This is from, I think 2014 is what it says on IMDb. It was nominated for an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film that year. Did not win. I think it should have won personally. This is Wild Tales, which is an anthology film from Argentina, I believe. And these are indeed some wild tales. This is a crowd-pleasing movie. I saw it in a theater at the Traverse City Film Festival, and people were gasping and applauding and laughing, and it was just the response was fantastic. It's one of my favorite theatrical experiences I've had. I think this is a movie just about everyone will like, which I can't usually say, and it's a movie I'm just eager. It's a movie you watch and you're eager to show other people. Mm-hmm. It's a very exciting and audacious film, and I really like it.
Is it just different than ours?
Okay. And I will go. I think we're finding a larger disconnect between body and mind here on the 706. So I want to I want to reinvigorate us with
it's Osmosis Jones, isn't it?
With an increased level of physicality. That would have been a good one too. But this movie is so brilliant, if only for the level of choreography it's an orchestral work made manifest through motion, and that is
I'm tingling.
The Raid Redemption, 2011. It's directed by Gareth Evans. If you haven't heard of it, it's starring Iko Uwais. I think it's I want to say Filipino foreign film. I admittedly I don't know. It is a foreign film. There's subtitles, but it's a martial arts kind of thriller, basically, where it's almost in video game style, which I think is cool for Connor and I. But it's a SWAT team has to clear out a tenement building floor by floor, and we are let through the action. We are meant to see the action through the lens of one very prodigious crime fighter in the SWAT team, who's also one of the biggest badasses in the real life since Jackie Chan. This guy does all his own stunts. He's an amazing martial artist. So I think, and we haven't done a martial arts film, so I think it might be interesting.
Interesting. Kind of a different, interesting collection. Can we get the rebuttals, please?
Sure. If we this is a movie podcast, not a video game podcast, despite what you may have heard on the Tropical Freeze bonus bit. So that applies to both of your movies.
We talked about Zelda last time. It's becoming a video game
But
podcast.
I will say I played Red Dead Redemption, Kirk, and it's overrated. So I don't
Wow. You're appropriating my bit.
That was one of the best I've heard, though.
Wow, pretty good.
It was top 5.
Top 5? I've done like 87.
Oh, come on, just say your rebuttal. Come on.
That's pretty good. Come on.
Go ahead. So, what was your movie again? It was,
Wild Tales.
Wild Tales. It was about those steamy nights between Lewis Clark and Sacagawea. It was Wild Tale. Just singular tale. Okay, never mind. Tony's not amused. I know you guys can't see his facial expression. And then Anthony, you did some sort of period piece. Was The Crucible, Pilgrim's Pride, or Pilgrim's Progress? I'm not interested.
I love to watch The Crucible.
Yeah, well,
Pilgrim's Progress.
Unfortunately,
the Oregon Trail.
Unfortunately, Shersha is out of town, so we can't do that with a special guest host. But that's deep cut. That's like an IMDb fact, that quip just there. Anyways, I love my movie. I'm confident with that. My movie will make America great again. All right,
Okay.
Anthony.
I thought Tony was still going. Well, I've seen The Raid Redemption, and I think it's... I'm just kidding, Kirk. I haven't seen it.
Yes! Have you seen it?
I've seen it.
Kirk spoke about the video game aspects of that. I mean, that's certainly something Scott Pilgrim's incorporated pretty well, but both orchestral and orchestrated fights. So in some sense, it's also a martial arts action movie. I think it's just also one of the funniest movies I've seen in quite some time. I don't know, have you seen it?
I've not, no.
Okay. Wild Tales, I volunteered at the theater when it came out at Chelsea, and after Tony's insistence on seeing it last semester, I finally did over the break. And it's wonderful to incorporate, I guess, Argentinian cinema. So I mean, I don't have a problem with any of the movies they've nominated, but I'm willing to watch whatever at this point.
Okay. So we were talking last time. Anthony insinuated that I had a grudge against him because he did not pick Iron Giant. Now I would insinuate that Anthony has a grudge against me because not only did he pick my movie kind of unawares, I didn't think he was going to pick it and choose it as a thing to talk about in a negative sense. And it voted no to my movie. Not only that, but he picked like a movie that I love, that I really, really, really want to pick. I would definitely pick if we hadn't been tossing back and forth. I don't want to keep it just between us.
We've all gone the same number of times. It's still
okay. In retrospect, I was not going to vote for a TV movie. So
okay. No, fair enough.
No,
I understand.
Just the fact.
Thanks.
Oh, of course.
Get out of here.
Kirk is Kirk.
Kirk was slapping me as I did the podcast.
No, absolutely. I'm just kidding. But I am conflicted. I'm totally just kidding. But yeah, Scott Pilgrim. Oh, it's a movie. Oh, I love the movie. I love that movie. I'm a huge Edgar Wright fanboy. Oh.
What else would you pick if you don't want to? If you want to pick that so much, just pick it. What else would you pick?
I'm like Tarantino, polarizing.
Do I follow my heart or do I? Oh man,
your heart is. This is just a male fantasy.
This is my male fantasy. Because some people argue Scott Pilgrim is a male fan. Is it sexist? Is it not? I want to talk about that. Is it? Oh man, the social aspects. I gotta go with the Raid Redemption. I'm sorry. I think about Scott Pilgrim all the time. So
As do I.
I'm sure we could talk about it on another occasion.
Well, I'll call Mary and tell her she's not going to be on the show now. So.
No. Oh no, I do really love that movie.
Well, the Raid Redemption has. I don't know if there's a single woman in that movie.
This is a win. Right. This is a win for. I'm dedicating this win to cancer.
You haven't won yet. You gotta go up to trial.
Yeah, you just
go
got
to bat,
picked.
Swing.
Well, I got picked. Anyways,
This is your shot, like Hamilton.
It's a foreign movie.
Tony mentioned, anyways, before the podcast, he said, "What's the big deal with like hunger in like impoverished countries?" I think it's an important issue, and I think that never mind. All right, I'm glad I won. Or I'm glad I got picked. Thank you, Connor. And I think everybody will enjoy it.
No problem, Kirk. Yeah. Now, also, it's, again, a movie people like to talk about. I've heard a lot about it. I still haven't seen it, so I do think it's on my list.
You never heard of
Ever the Raid Redemption?
No. I've heard of Wild Tales.
Do you even movies, bro?
That's interesting.
When it came out, it was pretty bad.
Well, after watching this, I was spending some time with local female action groups and stuff, so I haven't had time to watch
local female action groups.
What are the female action groups?
Like the Fox Force 5?
That's what they call themselves, the Feminist Society right by Varick Street.
Okay, but
Female action group.
on a film podcast, action groups means something else. I don't know. The image is different.
The
but,
Gators are coming
sure
out
they
of
are.
the
Oh, okay.
Sure
with
they
that, guys, if you would please leave me alone, I think I'm going to do a Google image search for garbanzos.
Safe search off.
I think it just means chickpeas. Anyway, but
Safe search on.
But thank you very much, guys, for watching this movie with me. I enjoyed the discussion a lot. It's great to have friends to talk about movies with. So with that, everybody, our dear audience, good night and good luck.
So I think the best discovery from this discussion was the bit in Ebert's review Connor quoted about, we find it here, the quote, teenage boy who goes to martial arts movies and fantasizes about guns and girls with big garbanzos. And then 2 paragraphs later he says, He works in a comic book store, spends his free time watching Kung Fu triple features, and can hardly believe it when a blonde in a low-cut garbanzo flaunter walks into his lights. He had to just go right back.
It was le mot juste. It was the perfect word to use in this situation. I think he was on a kick.
Yeah.
He wanted to just talk about garbanzos, and he did. He has the power.
He absolutely did. I think Ebert was known to be something of a garbanzo fan himself.
Yeah.
And you've heard it here first, but low-cut garbanzo flaunter. I'm using that. I'm using that in something. I don't know what, but at some point, you've not heard the last of that phrase.
Sure haven't.
But yeah, so this inspired you to.
So as I said, I wanted to do a Google image search for garbanzos. The safe search off. The results were disappointing. Of course, I discovered that indeed I was correct. Garbanzo is simply the Spanish word for chickpeas. It's still kind of current, especially in the American Southwest. Calling chickpeas garbanzo beans is quite common. So really, it's just another word for chickpeas. So if you do a Google image search, you find only references to chickpeas and some pictures of clowns, but I won't get into that.
Yeah.
But yeah. So
well, if you go look up great big garbanzos, that's when the clowns start coming in.
Right.
Great big garbanzos is slightly more interesting, but you just see cooked chickpeas in this case.
Right.
I guess they're great big once they're cooked.
Right.
And of course, from the Muppet Wiki, the Great Garbanzo was a character.
Yeah, a relative of the Great Gonzo. Yes. So of course, but we've been trying to figure out, okay, what does this come from? Why did Ebert say garbanzos in his review? Why did he feel the need? Now we've done a little bit of research. I've gone on Urban Dictionary. I've discovered many different words, usages for the word garbanzo. Sometimes garbanzo can mean something's garbage. Essentially, it's just an extension. It's a little play on the word garbage. It's garbaggio. That's garbanzo. Something like that. I did find one definition, and was in fact define it as a woman's breasts, as in her. I won't read the quote. It's pretty
salacious.
It's pretty salacious. So I'll leave that there. But yeah, I've heard sometimes people refer to it as like refers to flatulence. So it's all over the place. It's one of those words that mainly, you gotta admit, it's just fun to say. So that's the idea. Garbanzo communicates. You know what he's talking about. So it's interesting. It's an interesting little bit of word history that we've uncovered here. I'll talk to the OED, see if they can add this.
But you've not heard the last of garbanzo. We're trying to bring it back into the lexicon, into the conversation. It's like that book Frindle about the child who attempts to make the word for pen a frindle. I'm going to start doing this with garbanzo, so stay tuned.
All right.
We'll see you next week with The Raid.
Goodbye.
Redemption.